brings a wealth of professional experience in museums, focusing on natural history museums, and within those more specifically, zoological collections. So in addition to her museum-based work, which also extends to public engagement with scientific topics, she's worked with various ecological institutions focused on avian species and populations. Today, she's going to be talking about the site CollViz, which brings together work on collections data, which is usually managed via electronic databases and open source visualization tools. So thank you so much, Jess, for joining us from Wisconsin.
Hello, and thanks, Catherine, for that introduction. You kind of hit the nail on the head. So what I'm going to do is go straight into getting my presentation up for everyone to see. Did that go through okay? Perfect. So yes, again, my name is Jess, and I'm happy to share the story of my graduate thesis project over at the University of Colorado Boulder's Museum and Field Studies program, where I explored how data visualization can be a powerful tool for managing collections and how we can make it more accessible to them. So before we get started, I just want to give some orientation to my talk. The main sections are going to be outlined by those nodes along the left side of the slide, so you can follow along. We're going to start with data visualization in museums, talk about the project's goals, the building of the dashboard prototypes, the final dashboards, the tutorials on the website, and then we'll end with revisiting the goals that started the project off. So first, I'm going to zoom way out and give some context about DataViz and how it connects to museums and natural history collections. As Catherine mentioned, my background is in natural history collections and zoology, and so the dashboards I've designed and my perspective will be through that lens. But I believe a lot of the points in the presentation today and with my project apply to a wide variety of collections, so humanities folks, just stick with me on this. Let's dive right into DataViz. So DataViz, simply put, is the graphical representation of information and data. Now, DataViz may sound trendy, but it's actually been around for a really long time. On the left here is an example from who's considered the mother of DataViz, Florence Nightingale. Here she's illustrating mortality statistics, which she gathered during the Crimean War to show to the British government. We've come a long way since the 1850s. And now with powerful computers, DataViz is in a new renaissance where we're capable of making very complex and precise visuals, like the circular plot on the right side, which is showing the flow of migrants between different regions of the globe. But DataViz isn't just archaic sketches or complex modern art. It's stuff that we're all familiar with: bar graphs, maps, scatter plots, pie charts. You don't need to be a data scientist or a computer programmer to know how to make one of these or read one. So natural history collections are NHCs, and basically all collections really have some really important core missions that they're pursuing. Collections are a record of diversity, whether of objects or of specimens, that are capturing the variety across dimensions like time or geography or taxonomy. Collections manage their holdings by using technology and resources to keep their holdings carefully preserved, ideally in perpetuity. They make their objects available to researchers to help investigate important questions, and they also help support education by serving students, museum visitors, and even the public at large. Now, especially in the 21st century, NHCs use data to achieve all of these missions, and whether that's through a collection database or impact metrics. And they need to be able to understand and communicate the nature of their data. Within a museum, collection managers have to understand the scope and pattern of their collections, query specimens of certain criteria, identify their collection's needs, allocate resources, and manage long-term projects. And outside the museum walls, collections need to provide access to their objects to researchers. They need to advocate for themselves. They need to engage with the public and quantify their many impacts. And these are all data needs that are great candidates for DataViz. In many other industries right now, like business, DataViz has proven to be really, really powerful tool and are helping to meet challenges just like this. DataViz has gradually been applied to museums in their collections and even some exhibits. One type of DataViz that has gotten a lot of traction is the dashboard, which there's a couple examples here shown. Dashboard has multiple visualizations in one display that show a data set from a variety of angles at once. So just think of your car's dashboard. It's all showing you all different kinds of data about your car, the speed, the gas, the miles driven. It has dials and symbols and meaningful colors. This is similar to what you might find for a museum dashboard, except it's all data about the museum or the collection. So here's two examples of existing dashboards. The one on the left is from the Distributed System of Scientific Collections. It shows specimens across 10 categories in all of its affiliate museums. There's a drop-down menu where you can select country, there's a donut chart, and a stacked bar graph. And on the right side, we have an example from the Natural History Museum in London that has all kinds of charts that are showing data about how people are accessing their collections online. Everything from stacked bars to line graphs, modified text, and even a tree map in the lower right-hand corner. So with all this neat stuff happening, what's missing? Accessibility. Right now, there's a lot of significant barriers to any collection or museum being able to use DataViz. And there's 4 barriers that I started to notice when I was taking a closer look at the current museum DataViz landscape. First, most of the existing dashboards are by larger institutions that have the specialized staff and resources to invest in experimenting in something unorthodox. Most dashboards are made using computer code and require programming experience to use and customize. And these aren't skills that are necessarily common among or expected of collection staff. Next, existing training for DataViz is abundant, but there's nothing targeted to this particular audience yet. And while there are dashboards out there for a variety of tasks in museums and collections, they were each designed in isolation, and so they would each require quite a significant learning curve if you wanted to use one and another one as an example to follow. So that's where this project comes in. Let's go back to the goals before getting into the nuts and bolts first. So the goals were to create tools and resources that can target each one of these barriers and lower them as best I can. Let's make something that's free and easy to use, like a template, so that you don't have to start from scratch. Let's make something user-friendly and straightforward. Let's make tutorials that are meant for collection and natural history collection staff, with their knowledge, their needs, their data, and their tasks in mind. And let's make a whole suite of tools that all look and act in a similar way so that it's easier to try another one. So why me, why now? Well, looking back, there were a lot of things that helped me answer the big scary question of what do you want to do for your thesis? And I thought back to what drew me to museum work in the first place, which is that it's an inherently interdisciplinary place. It's where science meets storytelling, meets education, meets community service. And managing collections is a role that really embodies this spirit. I really wanted to find a project that would help me dive deeper into why I love working in museums in the first place and explore how I might leave a unique mark on my field. I also had unknowingly already did a thesis about DataViz as an undergrad before I even knew that was a term, where I did a data-intensive research project about bird migration and then tried translating my findings into paintings. So I was actually pretty comfortable already with trying something a little unorthodox. And so why now? Well, this is a special time where DataViz has become very powerful and mostly accessible in many places, but museums are just starting to dip their toes in it. The potential is there, it just needs a little momentum. So how do we get there? It starts with an initial design process of gathering information and sketching ideas. Then we make prototypes for people to test and give feedback on. And then we modify them into final products and put them somewhere that where people can find them and use them. So the whole set of final products here was a suite of 4 templates their tutorials, and a website to host them. To make a proper dashboard, you really need to take the time early on to do homework and get some drafts. While there's a lot of DataViz programs out there, it quickly became clear to me that the best choice for this project was Tableau. Tableau is a free to download and use software that connects to a dataset as simple as an Excel spreadsheet, and it lets you build your own visualizations and dashboards. Also, very importantly, with Tableau, you can download a file that someone else made and modify it and save it as your own copy. This is key because that's how people will be able to download my dashboard as a template and then just swap their data into it and make the appropriate customizations. Tableau is also meant to be super user-friendly with familiar menus, and you don't need to know how to code. And lastly, Tableau already has a ton of resources out there, and it makes it that much easier to get the hang of and to get the answers that you need while you're starting to learn how to use it. So we're already starting to address some of those 4 barriers from the beginning. As I mentioned earlier, I took an inventory of any museum dashboard I could find, looking at what data they depict, how they do it, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, so I know I might be adding something unique and helpful. Then I came up with a list of initial dashboard ideas, each based on a different collection management task. Academic impact is for measuring a collection's role in research and academia. Broader impact is for measuring its role in society, including impact on its local community or on education. Collection scope would show the scope of your specimens or objects in a collection across things like time or geography. Integrated pest management would assist with monitoring pests in collection spaces, always a big job for a collection manager. Project management would help illustrate and track a major project happening in the collection. And lastly, teaching collection would focus on the unique qualities of teaching objects and how they're used. Now, one of the essential best practices in DataViz is a user-centered design process, which is where you seek out and incorporate feedback from your target audience at as many stages as possible. My target audience was natural history collection staff, and I was lucky to have 8 participants from the CU Museum of Natural History participate and give me feedback. All of the collections at the museum are represented: anthropology, botany, entomology, vertebrate and invertebrate zoology, vertebrate and invertebrate paleontology, and museum education. There were 2 opportunities for feedback here. The first being a preliminary questionnaire. This was just an online survey where I explained the 6 dashboard ideas and asked the participants to list out which data that they think would be best to put in that dashboard and which of that data is available to them. Lastly, I asked them to rate each dashboard idea on a scale of 1 to 10 for how useful they think it would be to their work. And because this part of my project concerned gathering and recording thoughts and opinions and quotes from people, I received the required approval from the CU Institutional Review Board, which oversees ethical human research at the university. Besides the specific data suggestions from the preliminary questionnaire, there were some larger patterns that started emerging. Data is central to collections work, and different types of collections were using similar types of data. While there's a range of attitudes about using dashboards in collections, it was mostly positive. And not every dashboard is relevant to every collection. And lastly, for the sake of time and feasibility, the pest management dashboard was dropped since it had the lowest score and was the least available data. Plus, I actually needed to finish this thing before I graduated. So with all this information, I could finally begin building prototypes. Each prototype is populated with a placeholder data set, which is just in there so that you can see how the dashboard actually works. Otherwise, it would just be empty. This placeholder data set, they're just made for demonstration, and they're meant to be swapped out and replaced by the user's own data set when they're using the dashboard itself. These are either a sample of hypothetical data or existing data, again, just to use as a demonstration. And they're meant to be as minimalized as possible so that hopefully it's achievable by most people. Now the prototypes are ready to get tested and improved into their final versions. So the prototype evaluation sessions were the second opportunity for users to give feedback. The goal was to have one-on-one meetings for 60 minutes where I would actually get real-time feedback and suggestions as the participant worked with the dashboard prototypes. The participant could choose whichever dashboard they wanted to try out, and I would open it on the laptop and give them a distilled down tutorial to help. And they were then asked to go through the tutorial and work with the dashboard while vocalizing their thoughts and their actions so that I could take notes and record direct quotes on a cell phone. Then we had an open discussion about anything that came up, any suggestions they had, and lastly, I read out a list of 12 statements, and then I asked the participant to give a score of 1 to 5 for how well they agreed or disagreed with that statement. And these statements were about the tutorial, the dashboard, and how useful or feasible they think the whole thing is for them and their colleagues. And if time allowed, then they were able to do the whole process again with another dashboard. And to analyze all that information, I sorted the suggested improvements and the overall comments for each prototype. And then I categorized an improvement as either feasible, meaning that it's possible and within the scope of the project to do, or for future, meaning that it may be possible, but it would be something to pursue later on after the project had finished. The feasible suggestions were then incorporated into the final dashboards. And for the sake of time today, I will just give you a tour of the final versions of the dashboards. These are the ones that you're going to be able to find on the website. So let's go check them out. All right. So we'll start off with the academic impact dashboard. Here we have a stacked bar graph that's showing academic specimen use over time. And they're divided into color categories of sub-collection. Just reset here. Here we go. In this case, birds, fish, mammals, etc. We have filters on the right where you can select different criteria, where you can filter down the whole dashboard to just show those data points that fit in that criteria. On all the dashboards, you're going to see other features like a title at the top, legends, and reset filters button. You're also going to see icons in the upper left, where when you hover over them, you can put in information about your department, the data that's in the dashboard, and then also an icon with helpful instructions about how to use the dashboard and how to interact with it. So hopefully this is a dashboard, this academic impact dashboard is one that you can use to observe changes in your collection's usage over time. You could communicate your collection's research role to others, and you can make informed decisions about how your collection is being used. So for example, you could show this dashboard to the museum board that had passed last year's budget to show that their investment in digitization is actually increasing your international research partnerships over time. I'll do a quick demo with this dashboard just to show you how to interact with it. One of the things I think is the most powerful thing about these dashboards versus a still image is that you can interact with it. So you could hover over elements to get more info in a little pop-up box, and that's all customizable. If you click on elements themselves, then it'll filter down the whole dashboard. So if you were only interested in mammals from 2017, you could click that here, and then the whole dashboard is filtered down. Another example would be if you are just interested in loans, so where you're actually sending a specimen out, you could see that timeline broken down. Or if you were just interested in mammals being loaned, you could see just that timeline being broken down. So you can really delve down into something specific or just see the very bird's eye view of the entire collection. All right, let's go to our next dashboard, which is going to be broader impact. So with the broader impact dashboard, we have another stacked bar chart. This time it's showing the number of people who participated in different programs or outreach events through your collection, such as tours or volunteer opportunities. The different colors here represent the different groups of people that you might be keeping track of, like students or families, whatever you're keeping track of, you can customize that here. And the line graph is just showing total participation over all types of events or outreach opportunities you have over time. So this might be a helpful dashboard to help you see insights into which communities you are serving and how. You can identify time periods of high or low participation, and you can show your impact to others like administrators or grants. Grants, at least for in the sciences, are nowadays really asking for how a proposed project is going to have an impact outside of academia, outside of research. So how is it serving the community? How is it serving students? So this is something that could be helpful in that regard. So one example could be that you include this in a report to a local public school system to show how many of their students and age groups are engaging in your new after-school program. All right, let's go to our next one, which is going to be collection scope. So this dashboard is showing the specimens or objects in your collection. We'll start here at the top. This is a bubble timeline. So your collection is broken up into subcategories, which each have their own little bubble timeline. The size of the bubble for that year is how many specimens or objects fit into that or were collected from that year. And on the lower left, we have your collection broken down into, in this case, taxonomic categories. So there's nested boxes, and you can see how many different species and how many different specimens fit into that nested box by hovering over them. And then here we have a map, so showing where the specimens came from. You can have a shaded region map like this that's showing the counties in Colorado, or if you have the actual lat long or decimal degree coordinates, you could do points on the map of where things came from. So hopefully this is something that might be useful with seeing the scope of your collection. You know, you're seeing the entire thing in one glance, but it also lets you narrow down to very specific criteria. And it may let you share your collection with administrators or to potential research partners, or even to the public. So you could send this to an inquiring researcher so they can browse your holdings. Or you could put this on your collection or museum website so that virtual visitors could actually explore your collection, which they normally wouldn't have as much access to, in an intuitive and engaging way instead of just querying a table database. All right, so we have two more. Next, we'll go to project management. So the project management dashboard divides your project into tasks and subtasks. And your subtasks are going to be these rectangles on the timeline. This is called a Gantt chart, if anyone's used one before. And so each task has a start and end date, which shows you how long the rectangle is on the timeline. The color of that task is its status, whether it's complete, in progress, pending, late, etc. You can assign certain staff to that subtask. It's how many hours have been logged, its budget, how much of the budget has been spent. You can see the total budget remaining and spent for the entire project. And you can also look up a certain staff member by name. So if you only wanted to see what Bob was responsible for, you can see his tasks, their status, how much of his budget is left, which unfortunately for him is out. So you can really do a lot with this one, whether it's planning out a project, tracking it in real time, or reporting back on one. You also get this nifty line that shows today's date and that updates automatically. So you could put this in a grant proposal, again, to propose or report back on a project, or you could just use it to track the normal everyday workings of your collection, which could inform decisions when taking on new tasks or asking for different budget items. All right, and then we have one more, which is the teaching collection. There we go. So the teaching collection is a little different from the collection scope one because this is focused more on the education objects that are used in for museum programs or in tours or loaned out to college or high school courses, depending on what the collection is involved with. And so it focuses more on where the objects are stored, how they're being used, and what their condition is. And so in this table up here, each object is a different dot, and the dots are color coordinated based on subcategory, which you can customize. Right now, again, it's birds, mammals, fish, etc. So each one of these is a different object. So you can see that this table sorts it into where it's stored by room, by cabinet, and then by shelf or drawer. Hovering over that will give you all the specifics about the object, where it's stored, its condition, and if it's on loan. This bar chart shows the current status of the object. So if it's in storage, if it's on display in an exhibit, if it's on loan, etc. And then the pie chart shows its physical condition. If it's been recorded, is it in great condition, is it not? Because that could help inform management decisions. And then at the bottom is a loan tracker. So it's a timeline again. If something's out on loan for whatever reason, its due date it's put on its due date along the timeline. And again, you have a reference line for today's date, so you can see what's coming due and what's overdue, and you can get their contact information for who is responsible for that object. You can also use this search bar to look up an ID number. If you have an exact number for an object, you can just type it in and then instantly see where it is in storage and where what its status is, if it's there or if it's checked out. So again, hopefully this can help you identify objects that might be appropriate for an upcoming event or education program. You could send this dashboard to someone who is interested in using your collection for a class or for an event. And you can use this also to quickly locate objects and quickly and accurately put them back in the correct place. So pause there and get back to our presentation. Perfect. All right, so those are the 5 final dashboards I was able to come up with. But tools are only helpful if people can actually use them, know how to use them, and can find them in the first place. And so there's a few other parts to the toolbox that I had to include. Each dashboard has its own tutorial, which is a PDF document and helps to walk you through every step of the whole process, from getting Tableau to downloading the template to getting your data ready, swapping it in, making changes, and controlling privacy and actually putting it to use. And now all these resources, to get them out there and available to people, I created a website called CollViz, which, just like DataViz is short for data visualization, CollViz is short for collection visualization. And this is where any museum professional can go to start bringing DataViz into their work. It's where you can find all the dashboards, the tutorials, extra resources I accumulated along the way, and a discussion board for collaborating, and a way to contact me. And with all the pieces finally together, let's actually go back to see if these are useful tools. So what I've made here isn't the end-all be-all. There's definitely limitations. The design process for just one of these dashboards should ideally take years of trial and error and user feedback. I only had months, and so these are really just first drafts. So I'm hoping to get feedback as people put them to use. I'm still very new to DataViz. It's kind of become its own career path. So there were things that I'm sure are possible, but I was learning on the go. And then Tableau is a really, really great program, but it also has its own limitations. So the takeaway really is that people who are interested in using this need to also keep in mind that it is going to take time and effort to get the hang of the program, to get your data ready. So you have to meet me in the middle at some point. But again, instead of starting from scratch, this is going to save you a lot of time because I'm helping you skip ahead in the process. So returning to our original goals, the dashboards and tutorials are free, and the software is free and easy to use. There's no coding or programming experience required, and the tutorials are made for the specific audience and their needs. And it's a whole suite of dashboards that all look and operate in similar ways, so you can keep building on your experience instead of starting from scratch. So the goal was to create tools that people can use, and I hope CollViz can keep getting discovered and shared. So far, I've made some really neat connections, including y'all over at Loyola. And so if you're curious at all, I invite you to go check it out, play around with the dashboard, dive into the resources if you want to learn more, maybe give Tableau a try yourself. And I hope it spurs creative conversation about where DataViz could go in museums, and that hopefully over time it'll become more commonplace. So just some quick thanks to my thesis committee, all of the people who participated in giving me feedback on the dashboards, the funding that was through CU Boulder, and folks both at CU Boulder and the Field Museum who gave me some guidance, and then Spinach, the Society for the Preservation of Natural History Collections, to allow me to present last year at the conference. So I'd love to take any questions about either the project or DataViz, about doing a thesis or coming up with an idea, or anything else really. I promise this was only the tip of the iceberg. So it means so much that we could be here together today, and thank you for attending and listening.
Thank you so much, Jessica. So yes, I guess we can move on to the Q&A section now. I will enable the chat and allow you all to unmute yourselves. So again, post questions or comments in the chat, or just wave if you have any questions and I'll moderate for you. Okay, we got one post in the chat. It says, a few years ago, I was surveying visitors to the specimens exhibit at the Field Museum with Marie George, which included a video that visualized a lot of data about the museum's collections. Visitors often found the video visually overwhelming and intimidating despite efforts to make it accessible, simple, and readable. Did you encounter a similar threshold of hesitancy about charts and data in your project from either museum people or the general public? And if so, how did you get past it?
Oh, that is a really great question. Marie was one of the folks that I spoke with at the Field Museum because I'd heard about that exhibit, and I wanted to learn more about how DataViz is being used in exhibits, because it seems like an interesting way to engage with the general public. And I think it is a tricky thing to weigh because, on one hand, I think there's a lot of potential for DataViz to make things more accessible. In terms of, especially with science, things feel very cold or analytical and lots of jargon. And so I think DataViz has a lot of potential for, trying to convey something in a more tangible or a more visual way. And so I think there's a lot of balance in any way that you want to communicate something complicated. And I think that exhibit was a great example because it's trying to simplify and make something tangible, but it's also showing you all these numbers, and it's still, you kind of get lost in the weeds. So I think it's definitely a balance. In terms of encountering that in coming up with these dashboards, I think it was a tricky thing because I was working directly with collection managers who understand the data they were looking at. And so it was more of introducing like how to navigate data viz than trying to communicate data to an unfamiliar audience. So I think the way it's going to have to work in exhibits and the way it'll work within collection managers' spheres is going to be different. And I think one of the things about data viz that kind of makes it good for that is you can, if you really focus on what your audience is, then you can really tailor it towards what they need out of it. So I think to answer your question, I was working with a different audience, and so it's kind of tough to answer your question because I wasn't making something for the public. I feel like if I showed my dashboards to those unfamiliar with collections, I would get a lot of different comments back. And so it's definitely something that needs a lot more work into. And there's some great examples of people trying to use data viz in science exhibits that I was reading articles about. So yeah, I think that's definitely something to consider too. So that's a great question.
I would love some of those articles if you have them. Like, are they on the website or anything?
Yes, so if you go to CollVizDashboards.com and go to more resources, there should be, if you scroll down, it's kind of blocked by subject. And so there should be a data viz in museums or in exhibits section where there's some papers linked. At least those are the ones that were, there might be new ones that have come out since then, but that was as of about, you know, like last spring, the ones I was able to find.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we have another question in the chat. They ask, I'm interested in the process of processing or cleaning your data to get it into the dashboard. Knowing that there are professional standards that museums adhere to in collections, there is still variation. How much cleaning, would you say, do folks who use CollViz have to do?
That's a great question too. It really depends on which dashboard, because for example, when I was creating the collection scope dashboard, I was considering how do I design one that's going to be as easy for as many natural history collections as possible. And there's a lot of collections that put their data in a standard format into data aggregators online, like GBIF or on Specify, where there's Darwin core language where there's a structured vocabulary. And so I went that route with the collection scope one, but something like broader impact, where what your programs are and what types of community members you're keeping track of and what your priorities are is going to be very different collection to collection or museum to museum. And so I tried to structure it to be really flexible, so that the amount of controlled vocabulary doesn't have to be as stringent as something like a collection scope where you need all the layers of state and country and things like that. So it really depends on the dashboard you're trying to go for. What I was trying to do the most of in the tutorial was explain the actual minimum requirements to make the dashboard function, so that hopefully, it just really depends on the state of what data is available in the collection. And so my advice would be to really go through the tutorial first and make that decision of whether it's really feasible or not, because we do have to meet in the middle somehow.
All right, we have another question in the chat asking, was all of the data you used to build the dashboards exports from current CMS/CISs? With the teaching collection, you noted you could track where things are. I'll read that. With the teaching collection you noted that could track where things are, is that a live link to the CIS or is it manual updating, like a live sync back to the CIS? And looks like the second question was covered in Catherine's question.
So the way all these dashboards work is it connects to an Excel spreadsheet that would need to get updated if any information got updated. So if there was a way on your end to have an update, live update to that spreadsheet, then that would be really neat. But there's no automated link from the dashboard to the spreadsheet that I've built in on my end. partially my own limitations of knowing how to have that built into the dashboard. I think that there are ways that Tableau has that capability, but to keep things simplified and to keep things widely applicable to the widest audience, I just wanted to find the most basic way. So the answer would be no, but it was intentional.
Do we have any more questions from anyone? Well, all right. Thank you so much. Oh, Catherine, you guys.
I just wanted to say that I really appreciated how you were sort of like contextualizing the use of the dashboards in terms of like the importance of data visualization with reference to like grant applications and like reporting. I think that that is something that seems obvious when you say it, but is actually not a practice that like I engage in very much. So I think actually just even like sort of talking about this and, you know, sort of really being focused on like the audience and like how would someone sort of like view this is actually really valuable. So I wanted to say thank you. And then I think also Liz, Liz wants to know about next steps for the project.
Next steps are, like I mentioned, that these are absolutely works in progress. Like I had to produce something for my thesis committee, but the idea was that was really just the launch pad. So I really anticipate the more these dashboards get tinkered with, get applied, I can, you know, gather feedback from the folks who are trying to use them, and we can work together to keep making them more useful, more streamlined, and even maybe come up with new ideas, because these were just tasks that I had, or these dashboards were the concepts that I thought of from my own collections experience and from my education as being potentially useful, but there could be, you know, different dashboards that are really specific to other things. So yeah, improving the ones that are there, creating new ideas with people. I'm working to hopefully get a publication so that I'll get more word out, and yeah, because I really think this is a really an opportunity for a lot of really creative collaboration. So the more minds are in the mix here, the better. That we can come up with some things that are really really useful for specific sources, and also really important to share around and keep the ideas moving.
Yes, Owen?
I had a question about application for this in small collections. I know that data viz can be, when the data set is small, it can be sort of difficult to like view trends visually. So I'm wondering if you have an idea of what like a minimum collection size that you feel like this would be a useful tool in. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Did you have one of the specific dashboards in mind to use, or just in general?
The one that comes to mind immediately is the one you mentioned that it shows location, loan, and I might be combining two in my mind, but use in teaching as well.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I'm not sure if I have. I think the thing that would help the most answer that question is to actually hear feedback from those who've used it in practice. I don't think there's necessarily so much a limit on the number of objects, but in, you know, if you're able to meet because each dashboard has a certain number of specific data fields that need to be there, or else it won't really show up properly. So as long as those key things are there, you know, if you have 10 rows or if you have 1,000 rows, it should be able to function the same way. So yeah, it's hard to say because everything is, there's been some people playing around with them, but you know, they're meant to be customizable. So hopefully if things aren't working the right way, there's a few steps solution away to make it not just function, but really well suited for the collection and its tasks.
All right, any final questions, comments, concerns?
So I want to say thank you to Jess for joining us here today, and thank you for all of our audience attention and questions. And I think it'd be wonderful for folks to, you know, go in and, you know, experiment with some of these dashboards. I would also say that I think this has a lot of application to folks that are sort of interested in collections as data. Sort of in like the larger DH world. That's a world that like I'm getting more into. And so, you know, many large institutions have data that they sort of make publicly accessible, but as, you know, as you observe, it comes in these like spreadsheets, sort of like CSV files that can be, that can seem opaque in some ways. And I think, you know, something like this combined with that is has the amazing potential to be a teaching tool to get like students sort of like thinking about like how to take, you know, data like collections as data and, you know, put it in one of these dashboards. So it doesn't, you know, it isn't just sort of limited to museum professionals, and I think that there's actually a lot of potential to sort of integrate this like in a learning environment, which would be great. And Judith had a last comment, and she says it's great. I can see how much machine learning can also help glean tons of data that are hidden in natural history collections, and that the data can be used in the dashboards. So yeah, so making this sort of apparent, I think is awesome. And I actually would love to use this with my students. So awesome. So thank you so much, Jess, and thanks to everyone. And we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.